Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. Did somebody say you too? Appreciate that. Thank you. It is Mother's Day. Don't forget to call your mama, right? It is Mother's Day. You've been warned, right? Make sure you call your moms. Wish her happy Mother's Day. It is going to be a good day here for us today. How many of you plan to do something special for Mother's Day? Anybody? Anybody? Few? Yeah. Oh, not a very good representation there. Okay. Question for you. Actually, I got a few questions for you, but we'll start with this one. Husbands and children, how many of you typically do the dishes on Mother's Day? Uh-oh, you are in trouble. There's a few of you out there that do the dishes on Mother's Day. The rest of you take them out to eat, don't you? You cheat. Yeah, I actually heard a story the other day about a mom that was doing dishes on Mother's Day, and so she's there at the sink doing her dishes with her apron on and all that kind of stuff. And her teenage daughter walks in, and she is just like horrified seeing her mom doing dishes on Mother's Day. And she's like, "Mom, what are you doing? It is Mother's Day. You don't do the dishes on Mother's Day." And the mom, she just kind of gleaming from ear to ear. She takes off the apron, starts to hand it to her daughter, and she goes, and then her daughter says, "You can do the dishes tomorrow." That's not exactly the way it should be, right? Yeah. Anyway, it is Mother's Day, and we love our moms, and we're so thankful for them. Our moms are great examples of love. They're great examples of sacrifice. Our moms also have some great words of wisdom for us, right? Some of you remember some of those words of wisdom. I know a few of you shared some of those words of wisdom on Facebook this week in our hashtag Mama Says, kind of little segment on our Facebook page. I thought it would be fun just to kind of start out with some momisms this morning. You know what momisms are? They're those things that every mom always tells us, those things that we know that mom says to us. And for the most part, we know what all of these things are. So we're going to play a little bit of a game, and I'm going to, hopefully this will work out. I'm going to make the first part of the statement, and I want to see if you guys can finish the second half of the statement, things that mom says. Here's the first one. I'll treat you like an adult when you start acting like an adult. See, you guys must have the same mom as I did, okay? So this next one was like the cousin to that one. If you want to act like a child, I'll treat you like one. I'll treat you like a child, or I'll treat you like one. Man, you guys are good. All right, how about this next one? As long as you're under my roof, you're going to do as I say. Same thing. You do as I say, or you got to live by my rules, right? These all sound very familiar. How about this next one? Ask a stupid question? Yes. Is there like a book that our moms give, like how to raise your children? Like, well, these are the things that you gotta say. I'm not sure how that works, but we all have the same stuff. If all your friends jump off bridges or off a cliff, would you jump off one too? All right, before we go on to the next one, seeing how we've all had our moms say this, was it cliff or bridge? If it was cliff for you, raise your hand. How about bridge? Bridge? Oh, most of us. It looks like I went with the right one. Bridge seems like most of them. And even as I was writing these down, I was thinking, well, is there water? And how deep is the water? And if my friends jumped off and they survived, what was their reaction? Are they screaming? Are they enjoying themselves? Because obviously, if they jumped off and they lived and they're having fun, of course I'm going to jump off a bridge. But anyway, that's a whole other story. That's just what I was thinking earlier this week. How about this one? Shut the door. Were you born in a barn? Nice. That was a little bit tougher one. I didn't give you as much information and you still passed. Good job. How about this next one? Stop crying more. I'll give you something to cry about. Isn't it so funny that we all know these? All right, how about this next one? I brought you into this world. I can take you out. This is fun. We should just do this the whole service. Yeah, just see how smart our crowd is. How about this one? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. All right, yeah. And I'm going to come back to that one later on in the talk because I got to make this work somehow. How about? Are you familiar with the mom's curse? The mom's curse. I'm not sure. Let's see. If does anybody know what the mom's curse is? Anybody want to share it?
hope your kids do the same thing to you that you did to me.
Absolutely. Nice job. Extra points for Dave. All right. Yeah. The mom's curse is basically this. When you have kids, I hope they act just like you. They turn out just like you. That is the mom's curse. How many of you that came true? There's a few of us that actually came true. I know. Because I remember saying to my mom, I'm like, I hope so too. It's going to be awesome. Well, there you go. Anyway, so, yeah. You know, our moms are great. Our mom's given us some great advice, some words to live by, some things that we need to learn in life, things that we apply to our lives. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we use our words. And how can we use our words in a way that points people to Jesus? And how can we live lives of risky faith? And in fact, we're in a series right now called Risky Faith. And last week we mentioned that every generation for the last 2,000 years since the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, every generation has had men and women that have lived lives of incredibly risky faith. They have lived bold lives. They have lived courageous lives. That even despite the fact that their lives were threatened on a daily basis, they didn't give up. They didn't shut up. They continued to move forward with the gospel. I mean, they were incredibly risky with their faith. And if you were there in the first century, if you were a Christ follower in the first century, it was really a live or die lifestyle. And many, 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 many men and women gave their lives for Christ. In fact, last week that was kind of our title was Live or Die. And this week we're going to talk about you can either speak up or shut up. Now, I know that doesn't sound like much of a Mother's Day talk, even though I can imagine some of our moms saying that. You just speak up or just shut up. I can imagine that. Not my mom, of course. My mom was perfect. She was an angel. But you can imagine mom saying that from time to time. Either speak up or shut up, right? But we're going to talk about this whole idea of boldness when it comes to risky faith. And what does it mean to have boldness? And how do we share our faith in a way that is strong, but it's also encouraging? And so we're going to talk a little bit about how do we share our faith? What is boldness? And we're going to talk a little bit about that over the next few weeks as well, because this whole idea of risky faith, is challenging for us. I think a lot of us, we struggle with being bold in our relationship with Jesus. We struggle with being bold as far as speaking about our relationship with Christ. And so we're going to talk about that and how to do that. So go ahead and turn your Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3, if you're using one of our Bibles, it's page 982. 982. If you don't have a Bible, feel free to take that one home with you. 982, 1 Peter chapter 3. Here's the bottom line. And I get this. It's not really a Mother's Day talk, but hopefully we can still learn some things, and there's some things that we can apply to our lives as far as words of wisdom. The thing is, sometimes sharing our faith can be risky. There's a great amount of risk involved when we share our faith, and I just wrote down a few things, few ways that we risk when we share our faith. One is this: we don't always know what to say. When it comes to sharing our faith, we're like, wow, what if they ask me some questions? I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure how I'm going to start. I don't know what to say. So it's kind of a risk for us to start sharing our faith. Another risk that might take place from sharing our faith and speaking about Christ is sometimes losing a friend. Sometimes we can talk about things that are spiritual nature. We can talk about God and Jesus and the Bible and heaven, and sometimes we can lose some of our friendships because people just don't want to hear it. And so that's a risky thing for us to do. Sometimes sharing our faith is a risky thing, and talking about Christ is a risky thing because we can be made fun of. That's happened lots of times. It's happened to me, I know, lots and lots of times. We get made fun of for what we believe, and so it takes some risk. Sometimes it's risky to share our faith because we have that fear of failure. I'm not sure, how this is going to work out. I'm not sure if I'm going to say the right thing. And so there's that fear of failure, so it would just be easier for me just not to say anything at all. So today we're going to focus really on one verse that has a lot to say in just a few words. A lot to say in just a few words. Almost like some of those words that we looked at, things that moms had told us. and we can all relate to those things because, I mean, they were just such powerful words that almost every single person in the room, they understood it. They knew exactly where we were coming from because we've heard those before. So we're going to share just really one main verse today, and I'm going to repeat it several times throughout the talk, so hopefully it can kind of get ingrained into us, just like those words that our mom has told us throughout the years. They're ingrained into us, and I trust that as a result today, it will encourage us to be more risky when it comes to our faith, specifically with the words that we say. So here's the verse we're going to focus on today. It's 1 Peter 3:15. 1 Peter 3:15 says this. It says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord, always prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." So we're going to come back to this over and over again throughout this talk. And I'm going to give you 4 phrases to live by. Just like all of those phrases that we've heard from our moms, those were kind of phrases to live by. We're going to have 4 phrases to live by based on this one particular passage. And the first one is this. We need to fear God, not people. Fear God, not people. So let's look at this. 1 Peter 3:15. Here it is again. "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord." And that's the focus of this particular point. "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect." You see what it says there? It says, "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord." So we're to fear God. We're to revere God. We're supposed to fear God and not people. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any fear of God. I mean, if we're walking outside the lines, God has given us some pretty specific commands. If we're just doing our own thing and saying, "God, I don't care about what you have to say," and we stiff-arm God and we say, "God, I'm just going to live life however I please," we should fear God. We should, because God can correct us in an instant, right? And so, from that standpoint, we should certainly fear God. But that's not exactly the fear of God that I'm talking about. I'm talking about this reverence for God, this awe of God, this putting God first and saying, "God, I'm fearing you. I'm revering you as the Lord of my life." We talk about, as a church, we talk about asking Jesus to be the forgiver of our sin and the leader of our life. When we say we're asking Jesus to be the leader of our life, we're saying, "God, I'm trusting you as Lord. I'm trusting you to make good decisions on my behalf." That's kind of what a Lord would do. So to revere Christ as Lord, or to revere God as Lord, is saying, "Listen, I am going to fear you rather than fearing everybody else. I'm not going to fear people." In fact, the context of the context of verse 15 is actually verse 14. It's funny how that works out, right? You kind of look at what was said in the preceding text to make sense of what was going on there. And even in just verse 14, it's talking about not fearing the threats that people make, people that oppose you. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to read beginning at verse 8 of 1 Peter 3. And this will kind of give us some of the context behind 1 Peter 3:15. So 1 Peter 3:8 says this. Peter says, "Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil for evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. For whoever would love life and seek good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." By the way, there's so much stuff in that text that we're kind of just like skipping past. But do you get the idea? He's saying, listen, you need to live a good life that is pleasing to God, and you're going to be compassionate to others, and you're going to pursue love. And even when they don't treat you the right way, you still treat them the right way. This kind of sounds like the type of things that our mom would tell us, right? So he's given us this great advice, and he's saying, listen, that the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer, but the Lord is against those who do evil. So we want to make sure that we're on the right side here. And so he's given us all this advice. There's a whole bunch of truth there. And then he says in verse 13, he says, who is going to harm you if you're eager to do good? So he's saying, listen, if you're doing the right thing, if you're doing good to people, who's going to have a problem with that? And then he says this, verse 14, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. And then he says this, here's the context for 1 Peter 3:15. He says, do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. So don't fear people. And then verse 15, the verse that we've been looking at, he says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. So don't fear people, fear God. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. And always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. And then he goes on, verse 16. He says, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior, in other words, people will do that. You're going to face some opposition. But you need to keep a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. And then he says, for it is better if it is God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Then he gives an example. He says, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. So he's saying, listen, there's going to be times where you suffer for doing what is right. In this series, Risky Faith, the tagline is this, that when following Jesus is dangerous. And Peter is a guy that knows about this danger. I mean, he's a guy that, he's not just writing these flowery words for his own amusement. He's been suffering as well. We talk about Paul and some of the trials and the tribulations he went through. Peter's another guy that was killed for his faith. And so he's saying, listen, you may suffer for doing the right thing. But he says, it's better to suffer for doing the right thing than to be blessed for doing the wrong thing. When things work out good, so to speak, for doing the wrong thing, that's not a good thing. But when you suffer for doing the right thing, you're really blessed then. And then he says, listen, even Jesus went through that. Even Jesus suffered. So the context of how we're to share our faith and to share it with boldness despite suffering is persecution. So the whole context behind this whole thing where he's saying, listen, you need to share your faith, is a context of, listen, not everybody's going to receive it immediately. And you may suffer as a result of it. It is going to be risky to share your faith. You may face persecution as a result of it. That's the context behind this whole thing that we're talking about. See, sometimes following Jesus is dangerous. Sometimes saying the right thing and living the right life is dangerous. It can be costly. You can suffer. You can be persecuted as a result of it. By the way, did you know that Jesus promised persecution? He promised it. In John chapter 15, these are some of the very last words of Jesus, just before he's arrested and then crucified. In John chapter 15, he has this long encounter with his disciples, his closest followers, and he gives them some parting words. John 15, verse 18, he says this. He goes, if the world hates you, keep in mind it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. This is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. So right from the very beginning, Jesus is saying, listen, you're going to face some trials and tribulations. It's not always going to be easy. You're going to suffer for doing the right thing. You're going to face this persecution. Listen, and he didn't just say it like one time. He said it, throughout several of his encounters with his closest followers. Listen to what he says in Matthew chapter 5. This is from the Sermon on the Mount, right? Matthew chapter 5, verse 10, he says this. He says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Now that just doesn't seem to make sense. Like, okay, so I'm pursuing righteousness. I'm choosing to do the right thing. I'm trying to put one step in front of the other, doing the right thing, one step at a time. And Jesus says, listen, sometimes you're going to be persecuted for that. It's not always going to go well, but you will be blessed if you do that. He says, blessed are you Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then he says in verse 11, he says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. By the way, that because of me is an important part. See, sometimes people say all kinds of things against us because of our own stupidity. We don't get credit for that. It's only when we're doing what God wants us to do and people are insulting us. Okay? So he says, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. And then he says, rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All that to say is that we're to fear God, not fear people. You know, people are going to do things, they're going to say things that aren't true, that aren't kind. They're going to insult us, especially for our faith. And both Jesus and Peter would say, it's okay. You keep moving forward. You keep doing the right thing. You keep saying the right thing, and I'm going to honor that. By the way, we shouldn't be surprised when culture rejects Christianity. We shouldn't be. I mean, they rejected Christ. The culture, popular opinion, had Jesus crucified. So we shouldn't be surprised as Christ followers. We shouldn't be surprised when culture rejects Christianity. In fact, we live in a country that has incredible religious freedom, right? We really do. We're incredibly grateful for that too. The freedoms that we have. At the same time, as Christians, we can become more focused on protecting our religious freedom than we are about proclaiming the gospel. And if we have to choose between proclaiming the gospel and protecting our freedom, guess which one should come first? You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we get all up in arms as Christians. I can't believe they've done this. I can't believe they've taken prayer out of here. And I can't believe that they've done that. And they're, doing away with the Ten Commandments. And listen, as much as we love our religious freedom, we need to be more passionate about proclaiming the gospel than about proclaiming when somebody stamps out our freedoms. And all throughout the New Testament, and all throughout those first several generations of Christians, they were constantly being persecuted because of their faith. And Jesus said, man, you are so blessed. You are blessed. You are going to have such great reward in heaven because of that. See, we don't live in a Christian nation any longer, but hear this. Listen, the countries that are exploding the most in spiritual growth are far from Christian nations. And God is doing incredible things. And I believe that's because their suffering, the persecution that those Christians are enduring, I believe that their suffering showcases their faith. And God uses that. I mean, think about it from the perspective of light versus darkness. Where is light the most effective? It's in the darkness. When everything is bright. I mean, you don't take flashlights out, in the middle of the day and show everybody how awesome your flashlight is. Nobody's impressed. But when it's complete pitch black darkness and you've got a flashlight that is shining like crazy, people are like, wow, that is a nice flashlight. That is really doing its job. So as Christ followers, when we live lives of risky faith, we should expect that as things get darker, even in our own country, and also as things get darker in our own circumstances, we can shine even brighter in those circumstances through our suffering. And when we do that, when we shine brightly for Christ, it is the most effective at reaching people for Christ. And so if we're going to shine brightly for Christ, we need to run towards the darkness, not away from it. So we need to fear God, but not fear people. The second thing is this. We need to speak up or shut up. Those are the two options. Speak up or shut up. Let's read this, 1 Peter 3:15. It says, but in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. And then he says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So that the part I really want us to focus on that is that always be prepared to give an answer to everyone. Speak up or shut up. That's basically our two options. We can either speak up, we can be bold about our faith, or we can just I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to be quiet about this. I don't want to stir anything up. He tells us that we should always be prepared to give an answer. We should always be prepared to speak up about our faith when we're given an opportunity. Here's what I found. That when, and you know this is true, that things usually go better when you're prepared to handle it. Right? When you prepare for something, you handle it better. Isn't that true? How many times have we faced something like, I just wasn't prepared for that? Yeah, that happens all the time. But when we are prepared for it, things usually go better. For example, when you're studying for a test, you're preparing for that test, and then it's time to take that test, and all of a sudden, you feel better for it because you studied for it. In fact, I remember when I was in Bible college, my professor would pray before a test. See, that's one of the luxuries of going to a Christian college. They would pray before your class, pray before your exams, and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes the prayer that my professor had, I didn't like it very much. This is why. Hear me out, okay? Don't judge me. The professor would pray something like, help these students to do well according to how much they've studied. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. No, I've always prayed before tests, even in high school. But it usually wasn't because I studied so much. It's like, oh, God, help me, So when the professor would say, help these students to do well, based on how much they've studied, I was like, man, we should be. Isn't God a God of mercy and of grace and of love? Man, but when we prepare, we don't have to worry so much. Same thing is true with sports. When you practice, you get better at something, and then you're more prepared for the game. Things tend to go better when you're prepared for it. I think the same thing is true in our faith. The more we study, the more we learn, the more we're growing in our faith, the more we're spending time with God, the closer our relationship is with God, the more prepared we're going to be for sharing our faith. So Peter says, you need to always be prepared. I almost think he's implying that, listen, every day you need to get ready. Every day you need to be prepared. Every day you should spend time in God's Word so that you're learning and you're ready for whatever you're going to face that day. He says, always be prepared to give an answer. By the way, the word to give an answer is actually the same word as a defense. To give a defense. Now, by the way, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, we need to learn to defend ourselves without becoming defensive. That's something as Christ followers we're not so good at. But he's saying, listen, you need to be able to give an answer, to give a defense. And I kind of wonder if when Peter was saying this, when he's saying always be prepared to give an answer, he may have had like a courtroom setting in mind. Like when a witness is called to testify, they're called to the witness stand, and as a Christ follower, they're to share about their faith, to give a defense. By the way, the word witness actually comes from the same word as the word martyr. This is an interesting idea. That those first century martyrs, they were witnesses. They were people that shared what they saw. They shared what they heard. Those first century Christ followers who spoke the word of God boldly, they were witnesses who were martyred for their faith. See, sometimes following Jesus is dangerous. That's why we need to have this risky faith. And for those first century Christians, they had the option to speak up or shut up. And they chose to speak up for what they knew to be the truth. Which, by the way, I believe is one of the greatest proofs for the resurrection of Jesus. Is that these first century Christians, they knew the truth and they were willing to die for the truth. See, people don't die for something that they know to be a lie. But they would be willing to die for something that they know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is the truth. And they died for that. So for us, we have the option to either speak up or to shut up. So fear God, not people. Speak up or shut up. And the third one is this. Third words to live by is we need to showcase hope. Showcase hope. What's it say here? 1 Peter 3:15. It says, but in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give them a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So we need to showcase hope. Showcase hope. And I believe as Christ followers, we should do our best to showcase hope. And I mean this in a couple different ways. There's two different ways I think that we can showcase hope. Number one is this, is to display a hope-filled life. To display a hope-filled life. See, when it says always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, it implies that people will see you living out your faith in such a way as they notice something different. That's what it's implying. It's saying, listen, I see something, I see hope in you. Tell me about this hope. They ought to see something different about us. They ought to have some questions. In fact, you should live a remarkable Christian life. You know what I mean by that? Remarkable? Remarkable means that somebody remarks about it. Somebody has some kind of a comment about it. That's what a remark is. A remarkable Christian life would be like, there is something worth talking about. And the thing that they ought to see is they ought to see that we're different. They ought to see that there's hope in our lives. We should live a remarkable Christian life. We ought to have remarkable priorities. Something that is different from the priorities that everybody else has. We ought to have remarkable marriages. Our marriages should be different because of our relationship with Christ. People ought to be able to see that there's something different about the way that you live in your marriage and with your family. We ought to be remarkable at the way that we handle stress. There ought to be something different about how we do that. That people would see, I see that you handle this differently than the way that I would. What is that about you? How do you have such hope? It also implies that we go through the same common struggles that everybody else goes through. So becoming a Christ follower doesn't mean that all of our struggles are gone. We're still going to face some of the same struggles. We're still going to have some of the same challenges, but we're going to handle them differently. We may have some of the same common struggles like everybody else, but we're to handle them in an uncommon way. And the way you showcase hope will come through loudest when things are at their worst. So don't be surprised when the bottom kind of drops out from time to time. Perhaps when the bottom is dropping out in your life, it's because you need to showcase hope to people that are watching how you handle it. And when they see that, they're going to say, how is it that you're handling this so well? What is it that's making the difference? How is it that you can go through this with such peace and confidence? That's why Peter says to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have. They ought to see something hopeful in us. The second way I think that we can showcase hope is this, is to focus on what you do know, not on what you don't know. So when we're sharing our faith, and we're trying to share our faith in a powerful way, sometimes rather than focusing on what we don't know about our faith, we just need to focus on what we do know. And when we're doing that, we're showcasing hope. Sometimes we're paralyzed by our fear when it comes to sharing our faith because we don't have all the answers. Let's face it, we don't have all the answers. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say to this person. I'm not even sure how to begin this conversation. And yet, as I begin those conversations, God shows me the things that I'm supposed to say. And in those answers, I can showcase the hope that I've found. So you showcase your own story. The hope that you've discovered on your own. See, your own story is tough to refute. So when you're sharing your story with people about, your relationship with Christ, that's tough to refute. Well, this is how I've experienced it. This is how my life has changed. This is how my life is better. This is how the things in my life have been turning out. So you're showcasing hope. You're sharing what you do know, not all the things that you don't know. See, in John chapter 9, Jesus, he healed this blind beggar who had been a blind man since birth. You can read it later on this week, John chapter 9. I love John chapter 9. And so Jesus heals this blind man, and all of a sudden the religious leaders, they're questioning this guy about who healed him. They're like, who did this? How is it that we know you've been blind since birth? How is it that you can see right now? And the blind man said, well, it was Jesus that healed me. But because Jesus healed the blind man on the Sabbath, the religious leaders, they're accusing Jesus of sin. They're like, nah, he's a sinner. He couldn't possibly do this because he did this the wrong way, at the wrong time, the wrong place, and all that kind of stuff. So Jesus, he's a sinner. So what else you got for us, blind man? Formerly blind man. My apologies. Formerly blind man. What else you got for us? Jesus couldn't have done it because he's a sinner. And I love how the formerly blind man replies in John 9:25. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. Now let's just pause for just a minute there. This guy has just been healed of something that he has had a problem with his whole entire life. And he finds out that it's Jesus that's healed him. Does he know all the answers about Jesus? No. Does he have all of his theology in line when he's about to share his faith? Absolutely not. In fact, he says, I don't even know if this guy's a sinner or not. That's pretty basic theology when it comes to God, that he is sinless. Right? He's like, I don't have all the answers. I don't know all of this stuff. I can't give you all these things. There's lots of things I don't know. I don't know. One thing I do know is I was blind, now I see. That's it. That's his story. So as Christ followers, when we're to share our faith, sometimes we get scared. And we're like, man, I'm not sure how I'm going to reply. I'm not sure. I don't have all the answers. I'm not ready for it. I'm not prepared for it. What if they ask me a tough question? What if they ask me to defend the sinless life of Jesus? Well, how did the blind guy do it? He says, I don't know. I just know that I was blind, but now I see. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So when we showcase hope, we're to share what we do know, not what we don't. We share our own story. This guy didn't have any formal training, didn't know all the details about Jesus. He just knew his own story. I was blind, now I see. That's what I've got. By the way, that's what a witness does. A witness shares what they've seen and heard. A witness doesn't share the things that they don't know about a case. They don't go up and say, well, here's a bunch of things I don't know happened that particular day. They share what they do know. They share what they've heard and what they've seen. So one way that we showcase our hope is to share our own story. Share our experience as it relates to Jesus Christ. And then we also showcase hope in the hope that we've discovered because of our faith. So how do we showcase hope? We display a hope-filled life, and then we focus on what we do know and not what we don't know. So number one is we fear God, not people. Number two is that we speak up or shut up. Those are our options. Number three is to showcase hope. And number four is this, to build bridges, not barriers. I think this one is so, so important. And I think many of us have gone wrong right here. We need to build bridges, not barriers. Let's look at this. 1 Peter 3:15. 1 Peter 3:15 says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord, so fear God, not people. Always be prepared to give an answer, right? Always prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And then he says this, but do this with gentleness and respect. I think that is so key to this whole thing. To do this with gentleness and respect. We're to build bridges, not barriers. The text says that when we're sharing our faith, we need to do so with gentleness and respect. And I've just got to be the first to admit that Christians have not always been like that. You've come across Christians like that. Perhaps you've been one like that. That we haven't always been gentle. We haven't always shown respect to people. In fact, sometimes we're much better at creating barriers that prevent people from coming to Christ rather than building bridges and roads that lead people to Christ. Now, one of the things I want to show you a little video today from Rome. And we've only got one video for you this week. Next week we'll have a couple more for you. But this is about some of the Roman roads. And the roads in Rome was just this intricate road system. So we're going to check out a video that talks a little bit about the roads, specifically the Appian Way.
It's been said that all roads lead to Rome. Well, in the days of the Roman Empire, there was a lot of truth to that statement. I'm standing near one of Rome's oldest roads, known as the Appian Way, also called the Queen of Roads. The first part of the Appian Way was built in 312 BC, and it became Rome's link with the ever-expanding empire to the east. The Appian Way once ran 430 miles from the city of Rome to the port city of Brindisi in southeast Italy on the coast of the Adriatic Sea. This strategically located coastal city served as gateway to Greece and countless other locations around the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, the Appian Way is just one of many roads in the sophisticated Roman road system. The Roman road system was built for one main purpose: to create a quick and relatively easy way to move Roman soldiers and supplies from place to place throughout the ever-expanding Roman Empire. After Spartacus's slave revolt was suppressed in 71 BC, the road was lined with 6,000 crucified slaves as a warning. Though these roads were built several thousand years ago, they're still here to remind us of Rome's ever-expanding influence in the ancient world. Many of the bridges built during this era are still in use today. The Apostle Paul traveled across these very stones when he was brought up from Naples and was led as a prisoner to Rome in AD 56 for preaching the gospel. Ironically, these roads that brought Paul to Rome in order to stamp out Christianity led to the spread of Christianity, as early Christian missionaries were able to travel throughout the known world and spread the gospel all along the way.
See, roads are an important part of any civilization, right? They take you from where you want to, from where you are to where you want to be. Same thing with bridges. You know, if you don't have bridges, you know, you can travel miles and miles and miles and miles out of the way. We know that when there's a bridge out and they're doing road work this time of year and a bridge is gone, you know, and you've got to travel all the way around and take this long detour. And sometimes you just give up. You're like, you know, I don't think I need to go that town this week, right? Or I'll find another way. I'll find my own way. See, bridges and roads are so important. The roads in the Roman Empire, they were all about expanding their influence. You know, they wanted to be able to transport things quickly and effectively and efficiently. It was all about their expanding influence. You know, I think that's kind of what we want to do too. As Christ followers, we want to expand our influence. Not in a self-centered way, like, hey, look at how good we are, and look how impressive we are. But as we share the gospel, we want to share it to as many people as will listen. And like the Appian Way that was strategically located in Italy, you know, it started out in Rome and went down to Brindisi there. I believe that as a church, we're strategically located as well. I mean, you may look at us and you're like, we're in the middle of nowhere. Like, there is literally a cornfield, like, all the way around us. But listen, we are strategically located in a place where we can have influence all over the place. Amen. You know, think about it. I mean, we're located in the middle of like 4 different counties. People come from our church, to our church from 4 different counties, in 2 different states, and over a dozen different little towns. Why is that? Sometimes I think about that. You know, I look at a map of our region, and I look at a map of where we're at, and I'm like, okay, so we're in the middle of nowhere. But then I look at all these little towns where all of you people come from. And I think it's amazing to think that we have all of these roads that are all traveling out to all of these different neighborhoods, all these different towns. I believe it's because God wants us to build roads and bridges into people's lives. And He's placed us here for that specific reason. To expand the influence of Christ. To expand the kingdom. And I think it's remarkable. I believe God expects us to build bridges in all those areas. In Rome, they have that incredible road system. And it really is all about helping people to get from one place to another. Right? And I think that's something that God wants us to do as well. They have this incredible road system in Rome, and when you think about roads and bridges, they're incredibly important if you want to get from point A to point B. That's the whole point of it. You want to get from where you're at to where you need to be. And if we want to help people take their next step in their spiritual journey, to get them from A to B, we need to do a better job of building roads rather than building bridges. Or building roads and bridges rather than building barriers. Let's face it, we've all met people that have been more hurt by their church experience than helped by it. And perhaps that's your story, honestly. We've got to do a better job at building bridges. Sometimes we build barriers by expecting non-Christians to act like Christians. Let's face it, Christians don't always even act like Christians, right? And so we build these barriers. Hey, if you want to be like one of us, you've got to measure up to our standards. And we don't even measure up to our own standards at times. And sometimes we also build barriers by arguing and debating our own points of view in ways that do more harm than good. And unfortunately, throughout the years, many Christians have built more barriers than bridges with people. In fact, we've become known more about what we're against rather than what we're for. And that's why, we have a couple sayings at our church that kind of help us to remember, the responsibility that God has given us. One of those sayings is this, that approach trumps content every time. So when it comes to sharing our faith, we need to examine our approach. I believe that approach trumps content every time. Now, when I say that, I'm assuming that the content is also correct. Okay? I mean, if you're giving people the wrong content, it doesn't matter what the approach is, it's still not going to be helpful. So, but I think, as long as our content is correct, the way that we say what we say is as important, if not more important, than what we say. So how we say what we say is very important. Approach trumps content every time. Once again, we need to learn as Christ followers, when we're living risky faith, when we're sharing our faith, it says to do this with gentleness and respect. Not everybody believes what we believe, so we need to be gentle and respectful. We need to learn to defend ourselves without becoming defensive. That can be tricky, can't it? To defend yourself without being defensive. Another quote that I heard a few years ago, I think is pretty powerful, is that you win your friends to Christ, not your enemies. So if you're doing things, if you're just building more barriers between you and the people that you love, the people that you one day want to see them in heaven with you, that's not going to go so well if you're continually building barriers. We win our friends to Christ, not our enemies. I love what Colossians 4, 5, and 6 tells us. Colossians 4 says this, that we should be wise in the way that we act towards outsiders. Outsiders, just talking about people that don't believe what we believe, okay? And Paul is writing this to Christians. He says, be wise in the way that you act towards outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. So we should be looking for those opportunities, right? We talked about that the series before last. On mission, we ought to use every interest and every obligation as a way to point people to Jesus. So we need to be wise in the way that we act towards outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. Then he says this, let your conversation, so your words, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. That sounds like something a mom would tell us, right? You should have sweeter words because you may have to eat them. You ever had a mom tell you that? Yeah. So let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. It's almost as if mom was saying, listen, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Right? So as Christ followers, we need to try to identify, how can I say what needs to be said, but say it in a winsome way? How can I say what needs to be said in a way that points them to Christ, that actually builds a bridge rather than builds a barrier? And when it comes to living lives of risky faith, we have that option to either speak up or shut up. And when God gives us the opportunity to share our faith or to encourage someone in their next step, I believe that we should speak up. At the same time, if we can't speak in a way that is done with gentleness and respect, I think we need to shut up. So we need to figure it out. Can I have a conversation in a way that is filled with gentleness and respect and showing grace, that is seasoned with salt? And if so, by all means, speak up. If you can't do it with gentleness and respect, do us all a favor and shut up. Right? This week, I'm hoping that we'll remember these things. That we will fear God and not fear people. I mean, think about it from this perspective. If God is for us, who can possibly stand against us? Scripture tells us that. So we need to fear God, not people. Let's also pray for wisdom to know when to speak up and when to shut up. And sometimes there's a fine line between those two options. But I believe that if we're asking God for wisdom, and if we're prepared to give an answer for the reason for the hope that we have, I believe God will give us that wisdom. Also this week, let's showcase hope in every situation, in every circumstance, the good, the bad, the ugly. Let's showcase hope. Let's live remarkable lives that people will have some remarks that they'll say, hey, you went through this and I watched you go through that. I watched you go through that struggle. I watched you go through the death of your loved one in your family. How is it that you're able to do this in a way that is just completely defying the way that I would do things? That's a remarkable Christian life. That we should live hope-filled lives. That we should showcase hope in every situation, in every circumstance. The good, the bad, the ugly. In ways that gives people a reason to ask us why we're so different. And last but not least, let's build bridges, not barriers. See, Jesus came here to build a relationship with us, not to prevent us from knowing Him. We should be willing to do whatever it takes to help people find their way to their Heavenly Father. Whether it's building a bridge into somebody's life, developing that relationship, or maybe it's walking by them each step of the way, or perhaps it's even helping to remove some of the barriers that have been built up over the years. So let's be men and women who exercise risky faith in a culture in which it can be dangerous to follow Jesus.